Good morning. Welcome to an episode of Breakfast Analysis. Today we're going to be talking about organizations I'd like to see join in Rainbow Six. This is a fun topic people love to go on and on about, and I haven't made a video about it yet, so I'm going to now. And we're basically just taking a look at a lot of a big list of organizations that have never entered Rainbow Six Siege that I think would be a relatively good fit. What I did for this was I took a large list of orgs. I got the top 100 earning esports orgs from esportsorgs.com or whatever it is. It's not called that. Esportsearning.com. I think it is. And started ruling off organizations. So first of all, any org in Siege at the moment off the list. Any org that has been in Siege in the past, even if they've left, I didn't put on this list because it's kind of boring. Any org that only is in one game, so that basically just gets rid of Astralis, but they're not really an org, right? They're kind of just 5 Counter-Strike players who made enough money to start an org, and it's basically just them. So I don't really think that they're going to be expanding anytime soon, so I didn't include them. I disincluded organizations that were not really active in FPS games. I unincluded organizations that were dead or had basically ceased operations. And I disincluded a lot of orgs just based off of region. So I disincluded all Chinese orgs because there's a really small market for Rainbow Six in China. And it didn't really make a lot of sense for me for a Chinese org to join the game. It'd be cool. It would be really cool if we had a sponsored Chinese team, but there's probably not the market for it. I also got rid of a lot of South Korean orgs because there's a lot of Small South Korean organizations that really matter a lot in esports, but the Korean scene in Rainbow Six again is just not that big. I did include some. They have their own section here. And then otherwise, we pretty much dwindled it down to 23 organizations based on those specifications. So today we're talking about them. I divided them up by region, and I don't want to waste any more time, so let's get through these. We'll start with Europe, and although Astralis is not going to be on this list because I don't think they're going to expand into another game anytime soon, North are, and they're sort of the other Danish Counter-Strike team that matters. And they're a real org. They've been Counter-Strike since 2017. They're ranked the 23rd team in the world right now, which is pretty good for Counter-Strike, obviously. I think they have a FIFA team from 2018 to now. Can't really find any info on their FIFA team, but that might just be because FIFA is such a small esport. And they've got an Apex team in 2019, and which they still have. So, some good signs there that they are still picking up rosters. They're expanding into new games. The last 3 years, they picked up new titles. That's really good to see. Obviously, a big Counter-Strike org is going to be inherently drawn to Rainbow Six Siege as the same type of game. So that's exciting. There's not a huge Danish scene in Rainbow Six either. There's obviously a few top players like Pengu you can't forget about, but there's never really been a Danish roster that's been any good. So maybe that's a hurdle, but it'd still be nice to see North get into the game, whether that's through Denmark, Scandinavia, Europe, or somewhere else. Another org is not going too far from where we started. Alliance is an interesting org as well, which would be fun to see in the game. It's a Swedish org, and they're in 11 different games, or at least in the course of their history, they've been in 11 different games. They're Dota World Champions. They're currently rated 6th in the world in Dota, and they added Call of Duty in 2019. So there's a little bit of expansion from them coming out recently, and it was into an FPS game, so I think that's kind of promising. Obviously, this organization's main focus is more on Dota, and we'll see a lot of orgs on this list that maybe aren't so focused on first-person shooters, but there's at least interest there from Alliance that they want to get into some FPS games, and certainly, they're huge in Sweden. There's definitely some good Sweden teams in Rainbow Six Siege, so it'll be fun to see Alliance pick up a team. Next, we'll talk about OG. OG was almost a similar story to Astralis, but they have started picking up some more games. They've actually had Smash Brothers players since 2018, which is longer than I realized. And then obviously they sort of rocked the esports world by picking up a CSGO roster last year. That team's currently ranked 19th in the world. They're a pretty sizable org in terms of prize pool earnings. They are second in the world behind Team Liquid, which is obviously no small feat. Huge in the Dota community. The fact that they entered into CSGO very recently, I think, is promising for them. So that would be a fun org to join on in, and they've got really interesting looking jerseys. If you haven't seen them, they've all got collars. It's weird, but it's kind of nice. I don't know. Dignitas is the 4th European team I wanted to talk about. They've got 25 different games that they've expanded into. They're a very old org. Gone through a lot of rebrandings and a nice, beautiful yellow color. Their biggest game was actually Heroes of the Storm, where they won the most, followed by CSGO. They're also active with League of Legends and Rocket League. They're obviously not active with Heroes of the Storm anymore. That game's dead. But they seem to have a few main games that they want to focus on right now. I don't know if they're actively expanding right now. I don't think they have really gone into any new games recently, but they're still like a very long established org. I'm sure they're looking at Rainbow Six. The fact that they're in Rocket League is really important too, because in terms of like development and progress, Rocket League and Rainbow Six Siege are very close to each other. They're both sort of in the same tier of esport. I would say they kind of started around the same time. They've got around the same viewership levels. They've got both really heavy developer support with like pilot program skins. They're quite similar in terms of structure, if not in terms of gameplay. So an organization being in one at least shows that they're interested in these smaller esports, right? Not the big ones like CS:GO and Dota. So that's good to see from Dignitas. Misfits is another fun org that I think could make the leap to Rainbow Six Siege. They've been in 10 different games throughout their organization's history. League of Legends, Fortnite, Overwatch, and CSGO are some of their bigger ones. They don't have their CSGO roster anymore, but they did have a CSGO roster. For Overwatch, they own the Florida team, the Florida Misfits. No, that's their team name. Mayhem. That's it. That's what it is. Florida Mayhem. They haven't picked up any non-Battle Royale rosters in a long time. They've kind of been really pushing that area of esports, and that's what we see for a lot of these teams. When I was researching organizations, I was kind of saying like, oh, well, they've picked up some teams, but they're all like Apex, Fortnite, PUBG. Like those are a lot of the teams that are getting picked up right now, especially in like non-FPS focused regions. You're seeing a lot like the Korea region, where they've basically just been sponsoring like League of Legends teams and like StarCraft teams way back in the day. They're expanding, but they're expanding more so into PUBG and like a little bit in like Fortnite. So FPS-ish, but we kind of have yet to see. Misfits certainly have that history though of being in the traditional FPS games, so that's exciting. Speaking of Korea, let's talk about some Korean orgs, because while they're not a huge part of the Rainbow Six Siege, they're a huge part of the esports scene, and they've got a lot of really big orgs coming out of that region. So let's talk about some. The first one's Gen G. This is actually like a half Korean, half American org. I don't know. They don't like to pick a side really. They like to say that they're sort of the bridge between like Korea and the West for esports, which is like, all right, cool. They're most known for their Korean stuff though, and so that's why I put them in this category. But I think it'd be a really great fit for Rainbow Six Siege. They did just recently pick up a CS team as well. That team is ranked 15th in the world. They've only been in 9 games, which is not a ton, but they've had some like really big success in the games they were a part of. PUBG, they're world champions. They're really good in League of Legends as well. I think they're top of the Korean League at the moment. So they've been quite a staple, and the fact that they are sort of half Korean and half like Western means that there's a good chance they could jump into like the North American scene or the European scene even. But also they might jump into the Korean scene, Why not? I think a lot of these orgs, if they could help like bring more support into the Korea scene, especially with like the new Japan North region, gaining a few new teams. Cloud9's in there for sure, and they're probably not giving up their roster anytime soon. But there's going to be more Korean teams in there, and they're going to get a lot of eyes. So I hope we see some of these Korean orgs jump on in. Maybe Gen G will be one of them. I think they'd be a good contender. The Afrika Freaks are another fun team that I think would be really good. They are the only org that we're going to talk about that is only in Korea. They don't really like market themselves outside of Korea. They don't really have any other non-Korean players. They are in 6 different games, which is more than I was expecting from them. They're obviously very big in League of Legends. That's their primary game. They're 4th in Korea right now, and they've won some regular seasons in Korea as well. They're also pretty big in PUBG and in StarCraft back in the day. They were quite big there as well. So they're a bit of a legacy org, if you want to call them that. And the big thing for me is just that they have that little presence in PUBG. There's some like really big Korean rosters that I'm not really going to mention in this, or Korean organizations that I'm not going to mention in this list because, while they are huge, they like might only have League of Legends and StarCraft, and it's like, well, there's no real interest in an FPS there. FPSs are certainly smaller in Korea, so at least when an organ is entered into a game like PUBG, it's not exactly the same as Rainbow Six Siege, obviously, but it is at least an interest in FPS games. So hopefully there'll be a little bit more of like crossover there. So Afrika Freaks would be a fun one to join in. They also were big in Overwatch for a little while. I don't know. I remember watching their contenders team a little bit. So more FPS experience from them. T1, aka SK Telecom, they're a very storied org. You should, if you followed esports, League of Legends in particular, like at all in the past 10 years, you've probably heard of this organization. Might be the biggest org in Korea. Don't quote me on that. It's probably Gen.G. But SK Telecom are certainly a huge organization. They have been League of Legends World Champions a couple of times, I believe. They've got 10 different games under their belt, including PUBG, Apex, and Fortnite. All of those players are active, so they have people in those games right now, which again is really good for them. They've had non-Koreans in the past, but it's pretty rare for them. So probably we'd expect T1 to sponsor a Korean team, but maybe not. I could see them jumping into another region as well. Because again, the Korean scene in Rainbow Six Siege is a little bit lacking, and there's not a lot of talent there for a big org like T1. But it would also be really cool to see them sponsor one of those lower tier Korean teams and just give them the support they need to really bring their game to the next level. But T1 would be a really fun org. And they, like, unlike Afrika Freaks, they really do engage with like the Western audience as well. They don't have a ton of non-Korean players, but they at least like post all their stuff in English. Gen.G as well, and Gen.G try the hardest of the orgs I've mentioned to try to reach a Western audience, which in a game like Overwatch or League of Legends isn't that important, but in a game like Rainbow Six it is really important due to how prevalent the West is. Then we'll talk about the fun ones, North American organizations that might join Rainbow Six Siege. I don't know, I hear about these like every day. Somebody's on Twitter about how 100 Thieves should join Rainbow Six. We'll talk about them, but let's get through some other organizations first. First one I want to mention is Renegades. Now, you might be thinking, Jesse, that's an Australian org. It's actually not. Common misconception. Their biggest team, obviously the CSGO team, was an Australian team, and they have, since that team got bought out, they've actually sponsored another Australian CSGO team. But they are based in the United States. I believe they're way back called the Detroit Renegades, but they dropped that, I think, when they sort of focused more so on the Australia region. I don't know where Renegades would enter if they were looking into Siege. Obviously, some upsides for them is their biggest game was CSGO. They've been in a few other games, but they have like really focused on first-person shooters. So even aside from CSGO, their biggest ones are like Call of Duty and Halo. So a really heavy focus on those FPS games. And if they entered the scene, they could go into the APAC route. They could pick up an Australian team. They could come into North America, pick up a new NA team. They could go somewhere else. Obviously, Brazil's a huge market for foreign organizations as well. So there's options for them. The Australian, I was kind of looking at their Wikipedia page for Australian Pro League, and it's kind of getting full of orgs. Like, it's tough to find a team. I believe every team is sponsored by like a relatively large organization. There's no real team in Australia Pro League that is in need of a good org anymore. It seems like from the outside looking in, at least. I mean, there's some smaller ones. Oh, this one's called TBD. Okay, maybe TBD doesn't have an organization yet. So, who knows? Maybe Renegades could pop in for that one. But, I don't know. It'd be nice to see Renegades even here in NA. Maybe build more of a brand up in the North American region. That could be good for them. Another organization I want to talk about is Ghost Gaming. They've been in a couple different FPSs. They haven't really had any like main stage huge success. The most success they've actually found was in Fortnite, which was surprising to me because I more so know their CSGO team, but they also have Gears and PUBG, which are quite big. They're mostly a North American org who sponsor North American teams, but not exclusively. They've been in 9 different games over their history, so I don't know. Siege feels like a game that would fit Ghost Gaming quite well, and if they could find a team, then that would be really exciting to see them enter our scene. Complexity as well is a very long storied org. They've got a long history in esports. They've competed in 24 games, which is maybe the most out of any org on this team or on this list. I don't know who exactly is the most, but 24 has got to be up there, top 3 for sure. Dota, Call of Duty, CS:GO have been some of their biggest for complexity. Not a ton of success. Like, no, I don't think they've ever won a world championship in those like primary main games. There's probably some like lower tier games where they've won some tier 1 tournaments, but they seem to kind of like jump into a ton of different games, find a lot of support, find a lot of like fans for sure, but I don't know if they've ever really found that tier 1 esport, tier 1 tournament success. They have players all around the globe: North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Middle East, Africa, Australia. Basically every place where there are players, you'll find a complexity player. So, I have them here in the North America list, but certainly for them and for all the orgs really, we could see them jump into any region across the globe. But I'd be interested to see where Complexity goes. I feel like with APAC getting more and more support, we might see more orgs jump over there, and that'd be a fun place for Complexity to jump into. Brazil as well, with some new teams getting invited up to Pro League. That could be a good opening for them. Would be fun to see them join, certainly. Splice was another org I had on this list. They kind of died. I don't know. Splice is a weird org because they were operating as of just a few months ago, just in like mid to late 2019. They were playing games, but they've kind of broken themselves up. Their main team is kind of Mad Lions now, which is a League of Legends and a CS:GO roster. Might be more, but that's all I could find from the Mad Lions. So fair enough. They kind of transitioned to the Mad Lions, but they also own the Defiance, the Toronto Defiance, in Overwatch. So they kind of just break themselves up into a couple different organizations, which is fine. Their Twitter account, last I checked, was suspended. And that was this morning. Don't know the story about why that is like that, but their website's still up. It's a little out of date, but they have a website. So even if Splice doesn't enter into Rainbow Six Siege, it would be fun to see Mad Lions jump on board. Probably the Toronto Defiant won't jump into Siege anytime soon, but Mad Lions already an organization that have crossed different games, so it'd be fun to see them join into Rainbow Six Siege. They have only really focused on European players since this transition. The organization Splice was based out of North America, but it seems like their player focus has been more on Europe. So obviously European Pro League is quite full right now, but perhaps they could find somebody instead of European Challenger League who's looking for an org. Certainly there's a couple of those alive right now, and European Challenger League probably starting close to when this video comes out. Might be the day this video comes out. Might also have already started by the time this video's out. So that could be kind of cool to see Splice join into the scene and see what they could bring. The big one that everybody likes to talk about, 100 Thieves, would be a welcome addition to Rainbow Six Siege. I don't know. This isn't really that storied of an esports org. They haven't had a ton of success, but their founder is quite popular. Nadeshot was really big in the Call of Duty community, and since 100 Thieves were not able to get into the Call of Duty World League, there was a huge thing about that, and Nadeshot kind of came on camera and was like, it's not worth it. Franchising's bad, so he didn't. And so 100 Thieves were kind of looking for teams, and so they're focusing right now on Fortnite and CSGO. They have a pretty good CSGO team. They bought Renegades, who we talked about, 5 minutes ago. And that's going quite well for them, it seems. So they are branching out to more games now that the Call of Duty has sort of shut its doors, and they haven't really been let inside. So it seems like they're looking for more games. Whether they're still looking for games or whether they're happy with Fortnite and CSGO, which is what they currently have, impossible to say, right? Unless you're Nadeshot himself. They've talked about how they're more of like a clothing company that just uses esports teams as branding rather than an esports org that happens to have like a merch line. So maybe they're less likely than these other orgs to actually pick up a team. But hey, I mean, keep adding Nadeshot on Twitter, and maybe it'll happen eventually. Last North American org I wanted to talk about was Team Envy, Envious if you'd prefer. They're mainly like a CSGO and Call of Duty team, but they also have 2 franchises in Blizzard games. That's the Dallas Fuel and the Dallas Empire. They've been in 15 games over the course of their history, so that's quite a lot. That's more than most organizations on this list. They tend to stick in North America, but they have gone elsewhere in the past. They're just a really storied and solid organization, and so that gives me a lot of hope for them. The fact that they are in 2 different Blizzard leagues, say what you will about those leagues, but it at least shows that Envy is a relatively stable org. It shows that they have the funding and they're willing to commit a lot of money and a lot of resources to those games. Maybe that means that Call of Duty and Overwatch are kind of sucking up all of their resources. I have no idea what the financials of that company is like, but at least it shows that they're willing to put some money into some teams. And so if they could get that same sort of support from Rainbow Six Siege, it'd be fun to see them jump on board. 3 more regions I want to talk about. The first one is Latin America. There's really no good Brazilian orgs that aren't already in Siege. The Brazilian orgs are kind of here already. We've kind of got them all, and that's good. I'm glad because for Brazil, Rainbow Six is probably the proportionally most popular game. I think Brazil probably holds the largest portion in Rainbow Six Siege compared to any other esport. This is probably their best. I don't know if it's their favorite esport, probably in terms of pure numbers. They're there are probably more CSGO Brazil fans than Rainbow Six Brazil fans, but in terms of percentages, would not be surprised if Brazil, if Rainbow Six ranked the highest, because I don't know, orgs seem to like it, their players seem to like it, their teams are really good. I think the percentage of top teams in Rainbow Six that are Brazilian is higher than any other esport. Nothing really comes close except for CSGO. Maybe CSGO a few years ago had more like LATAM support, more Brazilian support, but right now it seems like Brazil is really focused on Rainbow Six Siege, so it's nice that all their orgs are already here. There's one org I wanted to mention that was Infamous. They're a very successful Dota roster. They've had a couple different teams as well in different games. They've had a Battlefield team, Clash Royale, and Hearthstone are the other games that they've ventured into in the past. Those are all a little while ago. They're a little unlikely due to the fact they're not Brazilian. I believe they're from Peru. So until we get like a really solid Spanish Latin American team, we're probably not going to see Infamous in our game. I doubt that they would sponsor a Brazilian team. They've never sponsored Brazilian players in the past. It's different language. Maybe they would. Maybe they jump to another region. But it seems most likely scenario for getting Infamous into the scene would be for like Latin America, Spanish Latin America, if you want to call it, to really pop off. And not Mexico, Spanish South America, I guess. We're getting really specific here. With them getting more support in year 5 and 6 with the revamped like Pro League schedule, we're supposed to have their own like Pro League. That might be an opportunity for them, but really have no idea how much support that's actually going to get. Where those players are going to be coming from. Obviously, like Argentina, I believe, is the main focus for them. So we'll see. Very much a long shot. I wouldn't be surprised if Infamous hasn't even thought of us, but I wanted to put some Latin American org on the list because otherwise, kind of be leaving them out. Next organization or next region I want to talk about, you might have noticed when I was talking about Europe that I didn't mention any Russian organizations, even though there are a ton of really good CIS orgs, and so now we're talking about the CIS region. In Rainbow Six, CIS and Europe are considered to be basically the exact same region. Europe plays with CIS all the time. Team Empire is going to be going up against, like, I want to use Na'Vi because they're British, but that's a bad example due to orgs. They're going to be playing up against, like, Rogue all the time. And that's because of the same region. But in most esports, CIS and Europe are considered to be different regions. And the organizations tend to, the CIS organizations that tend to stick inside of CIS. Na'Vi's kind of an exception. Jumping over to a British team in Siege is a little bit weird. But nonetheless, let's talk about some of these CIS teams. Vega Squadron's the first one I want to talk about. Probably the smallest org in CIS that we're going to talk about. Their main team is a Dota team. They also play CSGO, and they had a League of Legends roster. I think they do still. I believe they still do. They've been in 8 different games total. They're a Russian organization, and I don't know. I wanted to include them because I think it's a possibility that they might be looking to expand. But they're probably the least likely option in this. Partly because they're small, partly because they're more of a Dota-focused org. You'll see most of these CIS organizations are either very focused on CSGO or very focused on Dota. Probably the CSGO organization is going to be more likely to jump over to Rainbow Six Siege. But there'd be a chance for Vega Squadron, and I'd like to see them join the scene for sure. Virtus Pro is the next team I wanted to talk about. They're a very historical Dota roster. I believe they are Dota World Champions, but they also have a pretty active CSGO team as well. They're also a Russian organization. They've been in 13 different games, so, while most people probably think of this as just like, oh, it's a CSGO team or, oh, it's a Dota team, they have shown interest in the past of branching out to different titles, and it would be very exciting to see Rainbow Six be one of them. I mean, it'd be really fun just to see like Virtus Pro versus Team Empire, in the Russian Major League or something. I think for a lot of these CIS teams, or these CIS orgs, I should say, they might look at Rainbow Six and be like, well, there's no CIS region. We're not really getting the same exposure as we would in other games. Let's go elsewhere. But there is the Russian Major League, and that does get pretty decent viewership. So, I hope these orgs do stick around and maybe sponsor some of those lower level teams in the Major League, and hopefully it's worth their time. Gambit are another organization I want to talk about, the last Russian org that we wanted to mention. They're big in both CSGO and Dota. I think they're a little bit bigger in CSGO. They're in 5 different games, which is smaller than the other Russian orgs that we've talked about. They're also quite big in Kazakhstan. So if there were to be a big Kazakhstan team, maybe Gambit would be the organization that they would go for. However, at the moment, I can't think of a single top Kazakhstan player. Oops. I can't think of a single top Kazakhstan player There might be one or two on like a team somewhere, but I certainly don't know them. So yeah. Well, let me look it up. I don't think there is, but Gambit would still be a nice addition to our scene. The last one I want to talk about in CIS was Hellraisers. They're actually a Ukrainian organization, which I didn't realize. Navi are obviously their big Ukrainian organization in esports, and they're already in our scene. But Hellraisers being another Ukraine org, would be fun to get them in. They're also an organization that's more focused towards CSGO rather than Dota, so for the CIS region, that's quite important. And would maybe lend to them to join our scene a little bit more so than the other teams. There's nobody in the Russian Major League who is Kazakhstani. I don't know if they're allowed. I don't know what the regional restrictions are like for that league, but either way. Last region I want to talk about, Southeast Asia. SEA orgs, there's a few of them. They're hard because a lot of the SEA region doesn't really like FPS games. They're very focused on Dota, somewhat League of Legends. It depends where you go. We'll talk about TNC. It's a Filipino organization, the biggest org in the Philippines. They're very heavy into Dota. They did have a CSGO team in 2018 for a brief moment, so there's an option for them to maybe flex into a new game. But the fact that the Philippines is also not really a region that is active in Rainbow Six Siege probably means that these aren't an option. But I like to mention it just in case we ever do get some Filipino action inside of Rainbow Six Siege. This would be a fitting org for them. Meniski is another org. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I'm probably not. They're also mostly in Dota 2. They're Malaysian. Now, unlike the Philippines, there is a relatively active Malaysian scene in Rainbow Six Siege. You know, not super competitive, but every season in Southeast Asia, they usually have one or two teams around the middle of SEA Pro League. So there's certainly a market for this organization. They're in 6 different games, including CSGO, which they've been in the past. So there's interest there in more FPS games. If the opportunity is right, it would be lovely to see them join. The last two are Taiwan teams, which is interesting. We do have a bit of a Taiwan scene. I don't believe right now there are any Taiwanese teams in Southeast Asia Pro League, but there have been in the past. Dad1 is probably the most notable, and I think Flash Wolves or AHQ would be great fits for any of those Taiwanese teams that get big in Rainbow Six. We'll talk about Flash Wolves first. They're mostly a League of Legends team, but they've also been into Hearthstone, StarCraft, and Overwatch for a little while. So there's a little bit of interest there. It's not been a huge focus on them on FPS games. Obviously, Overwatch is the only FPS game that they've really touched in the past. They're mostly just Taiwanese players. However, they've also dipped their toes into the Korean scene a little bit. So if maybe, you know, the Taiwanese players weren't really popping off, but the Korean scene started to get big in Rainbow Six, you could see them expand out over there, but there's obviously a lot of competition. So they'd have to get in pretty early for that to really work for them. And the last team, AHQ, again, mostly League of Legends team, but they also have had success in Arena of Valor and PUBG. They've actually got a pretty active and pretty decent PUBG team, so it wouldn't surprise me if they jumped over to Rainbow Six Siege, at least more so than Flash Wolves, because it seems like they're more interested in the FPS genre, with obviously PUBG being not close to Rainbow Six Siege in terms of gameplay, but a lot closer than something like League of Legends or Hearthstone. So I would probably expect AHQ more than any other Southeast Asian organization, because they seem to have a little bit of that history, at least in PUBG. But it's tough to say. I think these last couple of orgs are all going to be pretty long shots, just due to the fact that Rainbow Six Siege not that popular in SEA, and these orgs certainly got to, you know, pick and choose where they spend their money, obviously. So that's the orgs I wanted to talk about. That was a 30-minute ramble. I hope you enjoyed all of that. Didn't feel like it went on for that long, but I guess it did. Challenger League starts up soon. I will be casting that. I think I can say that by the time this comes out. This video's coming out on Thursday. Challenger League starts on Friday. If the guys haven't announced it by then, that's not on me. Should be starting up tomorrow if this comes out on Thursday like I planned. And yeah, go ahead and watch that. I'll try to link it in the description, but I might not, because I might not necessarily know when it's or what channel it's being broadcasted on. But that's what I'll be focused on the next little while. Again, I'll be making a lot of NACL videos as well. However, this is the last week where I don't really have North American Challenger League content to make videos on. So we did orgs instead. Hope you have a wonderful time. Stay inside. Don't die to coronavirus. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.